Let me ask you something. Do you know how many bubbles are in a bar of soap? No, seriously, do you? Because once upon a not too distant time in America, this was an actual question Black Americans were asked as a prerequisite to vote. And if you think counting bubbles in a bar of soap sounds absurd, you ain't heard nothing yet. It was just one of the so-called literacy tests designed not to test literacy, of course, but how to effectively bar Black people without explicitly saying, we just don't want your vote. Let's rewind a bit. Voting rights in America have always come with an asterisk next to them, especially if you're Black. The right to vote, in theory, was granted to Black men after the Civil War with the 15th Amendment in 1870, which declared that no one could be denied the right to vote based on race. In practice, however, Southern states quickly got to work crafting ways to ensure Black Americans would rarely, if ever, make it to the ballot box. From poll taxes to bubble counting, a masterclass in detours. Imagine walking into a polling station and being asked to pay a poll tax. And then came the literacy test. Pages of nonsense questions with the express purpose of denying you your constitutional right to vote. The test might say, how many bubbles in a bar of soap? Or how many jelly beans are in this jar? And you had to answer perfectly. These weren't isolated incidents. According to my research, at least 60 different versions of literacy tests, with questions more outrageous than the last. They were designed to be nearly impossible to pass. And just in case Black voters did somehow breeze through, they'd often face a grandfather clause, a stipulation that allowed only those whose grandfathers had been eligible to vote to skip the test or tax. Since most Black people's grandfathers had been enslaved, well, there was the loophole. Fast forward to the Civil Rights Movement. We made some progress finally, thanks to the blood, sweat, and sacrifices of Black activists and allies who risked it all. In 1965, the Voters' Right Act, the VRA, was signed into law, banned those infamous literacy tests and poll taxes once and for all. So we're good now, right? Not quite. As it turns out, the United States is still not in the business of encouraging every citizen to vote. Even today, we have subtle and not so subtle versions of voter suppression that target minority voters. Here are a few that you may not know about. Number one, voter ID laws. Sure, showing ID sounds reasonable. But then you learn that many minority communities have lower rates of ID ownership, partly due to systematic barriers. In some areas, getting an ID can mean taking a day off from work or traveling miles to the nearest DMV, which may or may not even be open consistently. Number two, polling place closures. In 2013, the Supreme Court gutted a key part of the VRA that required states with histories of discrimination to get federal approval before changing their voting laws. Immediately after this decision, states began closing polling places in Black and brown neighborhoods at alarming rates. Imagine showing up to vote only to find out that polling place you'd go to got shut down. And the next one is 20 miles away with no public transportation in sight. More than 6 million Americans are unable to vote due to past felony convictions. Black Americans are disproportionately impacted by this policy, even though their rate of committing crimes is not disproportionately high. It's not hard to see connections between mass incarceration and the loss of Black political power. Gerrymandering. Surely you've heard of this one. But if it sounds like an obscure political strategy, think of it like this. Imagine drawing an arbitrary boundary through your own town to split up the Black community into several districts so they're always outnumbered by majority voters. Even if they all voted together, their impact is diluted. So here we are in 2024 with the election upon us. You would think by now we would have made it easier, not harder to vote. But there's still a quiet but powerful effort to discourage people from the ballot boxes, especially people who might vote for change. Here's the real irony. For all those roadblocks, every election sees Black communities fighting back harder and stronger. Even when the rules keep changing, there's a reason the turnout rate keeps increasing. Voter rights are still under threat, and the struggles continue. The next time someone asks if voting is really that important, remember that this right has always come at a price to Black Americans. It's a price we keep paying because each vote isn't just a vote. It's an act to resist and a stake in a future where every citizen's vote matters. So go vote and bring your soap.